Hello, thank you for joining me. My name is Jason Bosch, and this is If We Were Honest. And today's episode, I'm real excited to have with us Cynthia McKinney. And if you don't know Cynthia, she's quite an incredible woman. She actually was a member of Congress from Georgia, and she actually served from, 1993 to 1997, and then again from 97 to 2003, and then again from 2005 to 2007. So she's got a lot of experience in Congress. But the reason why I want to have her on is actually because she's been very outspoken on many different issues that are unpopular. She's anti war, and she has spoken out against our military policies around the world. And she's actually voted against bills to fund some of these military adventures. She's spoken out on 9/11 and called for an independent investigation. She's been critical of our relationship with Israel. So she's actually been on point with a lot of issues over the years. Also, in 2008, she was a presidential candidate with the Green Party. She actually supported some bills to unseal the records regarding the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination, as well as the killing of Tupac Shakur. She also supported the impeachment of George W. Bush. And one of the things she's very famous for was her grilling of Donald Rumsfeld in a congressional hearing, which many people have seen and cheered on. So I'm excited to have Cynthia McKinney with us today. And this first interview we did was a little over an hour. I'm not sure how it'll turn out once I've edited it down, but we didn't get to all the topics that I wanted to get to. So we're actually going to do another episode. So we just kind of started this process. So this will be the first of one or maybe even more interviews with her. So without further ado, Cynthia McKinney. So what I wanted to do to start out with was just kind of like go through a little bit of like your process and kind of what has led you to where you're at in your life right now.
Okay.
Because I know you started out as a you were a high school teacher back in the day, and then you got into politics, becoming the first African American congresswoman from Georgia back in 1992, and you served from 19 to 1994. And you were initially a Democrat, right?
Yes.
And how'd that work out?
It didn't work out very well. Um, as Rahm Emanuel said, I was not a part of the team. And so then he went out and recruited someone to replace me who could be a part of the team. And as a result of that, the bill to fund the Iraq War passed with not a single vote to spare.
So, I mean, Rahm Emanuel, having him say you're not on the team, I would call that an endorsement.
Well, it definitely was an endorsement for the guy that he recruited to run against me, and successfully, because now that person is in Congress and I am not, which ought to tell us something about our system, that, if you can be against wars and against spending so much money, giving so much money to the Pentagon to waste, you're against that, and yet that's not what the Democrats stand for, and so therefore you're out.
So when you first got into politics and you became a representative in Congress, your views have probably changed over the years, I imagine, in terms of like the faith in the system. I know that a lot of us has gone through this process of really believing in democracy as it's sold to us, and then kind of finding out the reality of that. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that, like kind of where you're at now? I mean, it seems to me like you've probably taken quite a bit of a journey in terms of your understanding of the world, and maybe your faith in democracy itself. Do you want to say something about that?
Well, my dad told me to, how can I put it? It was like the people have wisdom, Never underestimate the wisdom of the people. And so I do believe in popular wisdom, but what happens is that people are bombarded 24 hours a day, 365 days a year with propaganda, obfuscation, cover up, lies, deception. And so the wisdom is clouded. And that's the problem that we have now, is 400 years of cumulative clouded wisdom leads us to a system now that it certainly isn't a republic that works for the people. If it ever did, maybe it always worked for certain people. And so now I don't have faith in the republic. I have faith in the people, but I don't have faith in a Republican form of government, because if I look around the world and I see other republics, which are indirect democracies, what I see is failure. I see kakistocracy. I see as Greg Caton says, I see psychopathocracy everywhere. And so maybe the direct democracy is what we should be looking for rather than indirect democracy. And so that then would be a way to, I don't want to say codify, but sort of encapsulate my faith in the wisdom of the people.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, the problem, this idea of representative democracy implies that the people are being representative, and people just take that for granted. They just assume that, and I think you're one of the rare cases. I mean, there's a few others, but like really very few. Even a lot of the people that people think of as being the outsiders, I think
Right.
turn out to actually be insiders acting like outsiders.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so you have a situation like I just finished an interview where they were talking about the squad. And I said, well, maybe the squad never belonged to you in the first place. Maybe the squad were never really independent. I mean, after all, I never had anybody give me $20 million so I could start a media outfit. I never had anybody give me that kind of money and recruit me. I was never recruited to run for office and given millions of dollars. If you look at the squad, they have millions of dollars, access to millions of dollars. How do you get that money? Yeah. So we've got media that are supported by foundations. We've got politicians that are supported by billionaires, and then we wonder what's wrong with the system.
Right. And so, yeah, I think we need an overhaul of the system itself. It's not, we need to reform it or whatever. It's like, no, there's, I think sometimes you do throw the baby out with the bathwater. People like to use that phrase.
That's right. That's right. You're exactly right. That at some point you have to say, well, this bit of reform is insufficient to the needs that we have. And so therefore, we need revolution. I'm not afraid of the word revolution. I am a revolutionary, and I'm not tricked by these people who pretend to be what they are not.
Yeah, I'll make a point about the word revolution. It was brought up that the term revolution means you go around and you kind of end up in the same place. So even our language is like co-opted. I know what you mean, and I support revolution in terms of what you're talking about, but even that language is kind of like it kind of keeps us in the circle.
Right.
Like
we're trying to get out of the circle.
That's right. Yeah. So, and there's also seems to be a machine really that's built around managing dissent. Mm-hmm. and basically channeling people's energy and anger and frustration with the system into these things that will actually go nowhere.
Like Black Lives Matter and Antifa.
Yeah.
So they are very well funded. In fact, I saw some reference to Black Lives Matter having raised over $1 billion. Now, how is that even possible? Especially from a country that has this history. How is that possible? Well, clearly, Black Lives Matter was a front for something else is other than Black Lives.
Yeah.
It was a front. And so so now let's understand who actually got the money. But one of the things that we know for sure is that the average ordinary, volunteer at Black Lives Matter in some state, in some city, in some town that really believes that Black Lives matter or ought to matter, um, they didn't get the money. The money was concentrated at the top. I wrote a paper called The Purple Revolution, because, of course, on election night in 2020, everybody was, well, no, not 2016, Hillary wore purple, and all the
Mm.
Democrats wore purple. So I called it the Purple Revolution. And they wore purple because purple is the blending of the blue and the red. And Hillary was going to win by stealing for the blue team red votes. Well, it didn't happen that way. And so the paper that I wrote is called Hybrid Warfare, Have Chickens Come Home to Roost. And so I think the Kavanaugh nomination gave us an opportunity to see some things happening that we probably, well, that have happened for a long time, but that we probably didn't want to acknowledge. So it's called astroturfing. And so basically what you have is you've got these corporations that go around and they spend a whole lot of money telling people to write letters, or maybe they don't even write the letters, they just produce them on the computer and mail them, and it's all an operation that took place out of one office or something. And so we saw that happening a lot, and then we saw the intrusion of George Soros into US politics big time. So I chronicle how George Soros has gone around the world doing color revolutions on behalf of the US deep state. And then what we witness is that now those color revolutions have come home, and the United States itself has been subjected to a color revolution. So anyway, that's enough for now.
Yeah. Well, the color purple is interesting too, because if you look at the World Economic Forum's Great Reset or whatever, that's the color that they're using in a lot of their marketing for promoting this fourth industrial revolution and all the different programs that go along with that. So that color purple is really interesting. And also, like, historically, the color purple was associated with monarchy and
Yes,
royalty.
that's right.
So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, for some reason I found someone posted something, I think, or whatever. I ended up kind of going down the color purple rabbit hole of, like, it was an ink that was like really rare and hard to find. And so it was, anyways,
Yes.
interesting thing there. But so you were a Democrat, and then you were like, what was the thing that made you feel like, okay, this isn't working within this party? I don't know if you're familiar with the book by Walter Karp called Indispensable Enemies. Are you familiar with that one?
No, but it sounds like something I need to read.
So this is the book, The Politics of Misrule in America. It came out a few years ago, maybe in the early 90s.
Okay.
But it's all about how the Democrats and Republicans actually work together. How,
Yes.
they'll go behind closed doors and they'll, like, well, we'll give you this district if you give us that district. And
Yes.
he talks about how, like, you ever noticed how there's only like a Republican or a Democrat running, and there's no one opposing them? That's not by accident. That was an agreement that was made. So anyways, it's an interesting book.
Sort of like Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders ostensibly is an independent, but there's never a Democrat that runs against him, and he caucuses with the Democratic Party. So how independent is that independent? And I remember Joe Lieberman did the same thing in the state of Connecticut. He, when he lost the Democratic nomination, he actually then turned around and ran as an independent. So some people can run for independent and not be independent, and it's just another way. It's just another bit of chicanery. But when you ask the question, well, what was sort of what we say down south, my come to Jesus moment. Well, it was basically when I was in a hearing, and the chairman of it was the International Relations committee and subcommittee of the International Relations. And so the chairman of the subcommittee had called a meeting, and it was supposed to be a knockdown, drag out, big thing. And so this is like, if it wasn't my freshman year, it might have been my sophomore year. It was very early. And so I go to this hearing, and the chairman is just letting it all hang out. And, he's criticizing this guy. And at the end of the hearing, they walked out arm in arm. And I said, oh my gosh, it was just theater. And I was a true believer. At that moment, it struck me that I had put my belief in a system that was populated with fakes. And so my dad had always told me, Cynthia, they put their pants on just like you do. And then I began to understand what he meant. And so I didn't see them as, sort of demigods, or, I didn't see them as these great heroic figures any longer. I just saw them as individuals who could be flawed. And in many instances were flawed. There are some people who are still there, who took those trips with Jack Abramoff. So now, why did one particular representative get hounded out of the Congress on the basis of him having taken a trip with Jack Abramoff, and others who took those trips, nothing happened to them? So what was the selection process that meant that it was time for this one to go, but it wasn't time for that one to go? And so then I began to actually see. And a dear, dear, dear friend of mine by the name of John Judge, who is no longer with us, but he introduced me to a professor out in California, Berkeley professor by the name of Peter Dale Scott, with whom he had worked on the committee for committee on political assassinations. COPA was an organization that was founded after the murder of JFK. And so these researchers, trying to understand the system that could produce the murder of a president in broad open daylight, and no one be held accountable for it, or the one that was held was not the one that actually organized and carried out the assassination. So how could this all happen? And they dedicated their lives to understanding the truth of this system. And then before they knew it, they were not only investigating the murder of President Kennedy, they were also investigating the murder of Martin Luther King Jr., President Kennedy's brother, Robert Kennedy, who was on his way to become the president, and members of the Black Panther Party and the American Indian Movement, who were also killed by instruments of the US government in the COINTELPRO program. So this awareness and this knowledge of Dr. Peter Dale Scott then also introduced me. When the time came for me to select a committee for my dissertation, I chose Peter Dale Scott. And so John Judge had spoken often about the Scott methodology. And so I said to my dissertation chairman, I said, okay, I'm going to try to use the Scott methodology. And so, of course, he didn't know what the heck that was. And so when he talked to Peter Dale Scott, he said, well, you know, my chairman was a colorful guy. And so he said, what the hell is the Peter Dale Scott methodology? And so then Peter Dale Scott explained to him, well, you know, we look for what's not there. And then my dissertation chairman said, well, what the hell does that mean? You know, but honestly, that is exactly what we have to do if we're to understand the forces that are bombarding us and that are tricking us and fooling us and sending us down rabbit holes that are not real. And so trying to understand, what I used to teach my students is that we have to see the invisible, hear the unspoken. So we have to see what's not there in order to understand our environment, the totality of our environment. We have to understand what's in our environment. And it's not always obvious to us what's in our environment. Like, we don't see the atoms, but we know that the atoms are there. So we have to find them. And so we have to see with a different eye. We have to hear with a different ear. And that's what I used to teach my students all the time. And that's what I try to do. And that's how I came to stumble upon understanding my environment and the Peter Dale Scott methodology.
That actually leads me into another thing I wanted to talk about, actually, was
Uh-huh.
there is it almost like a willful unwillingness. There's an absolute unwillingness to look at something that's like the elephant in the room, which is the role of intelligence in the shaping of the world, and the dreaded conspiracy, you know, whatever. But you know, in spite of like mountains and mountains of evidence, you know, people, especially, you know, professional people or people within political parties that align with any political party, have this like obstinate unwillingness to actually look at the overwhelming evidence that there are these forces behind the scenes that are doing unbelievably unethical things to shape reality and shape the world and shape our understanding of it, and doing political assassinations. Flipping through your book, I noticed you mentioned Patrice Lumumba, who,
Yes,
you know, that assassination reverberates to
that's
today.
right.
I
Till
mean, look
today.
at what's going on in the Congo is utterly devastating even now. And you know, that was the hope, you know, what's another book I have there, the Killing Hope,
Mm-hmm,
by
mm-hmm.
I forgot his name, but you know, just
William Bloom, right?
William Blum, yeah, William
Yeah.
Blum. um but yeah, the utter devastation that these, you know, unruly, unaccountable, for, you know, the CIA, the NSA, these, even the FBI, have been just running roughshod and just totally. And if you're a representative, you know, the church hearings was such an anomaly, and such a beautiful thing. Like, wow, holy cow, they're actually bringing some of this stuff out in the open. But that was what, in the late 70s. I can't remember what year
Yes,
that
that
was.
was the mid to late 70s. And so, you know, we need a Senator Church now. We need a Frank Church now. And as good as Rand Paul has been in these last 2 days or so, the fact of the matter is he doesn't go as far as he could. And so we've got 535 members of Congress who let the bad guys off the hook every time. And now in my inbox this morning, I see the Democrats are trying to peddle Hillary Clinton as governor of New York. And I said, if there's anything that would get me back into politics, it would be a Hillary Clinton nomination for governor of New York. Now, we just had Cuomo, who sent how many hundreds of grandmothers and grandfathers to their premature deaths by sending them to nursing homes where they would die. Now, that was a deliberate policy. It was covered up. His staff has admitted that they covered up the real numbers. And it was a policy that resulted in the deaths of his own constituents. But he was doing that on behalf of those deep state entities that we spoke of earlier, that Peter Dale Scott studies. And so he thought that he was buying additional political lives by enacting all of these COVID mandates, sending the grandparents off and lockdown and all of this. And, he even got an Emmy for his acting ability. But he thought that was going to add to his political lives, like it's all a game. My dad used to tell me it's all a game. Politics is a game. It's a deadly game. It's a life and death game, but it's still a game played by some people who can play other people. Sort of like what the CIA guy, I can't remember his name, said the Wurlitzer, the Grand Wurlitzer, the CIA propaganda machine was the Grand Wurlitzer, and they could have everybody dancing to their tune.
I forgot his name.
Yeah. And his son, Hillary dispatched his son to go over there to make sure that the Arab Spring had the desired outcome, which was the appearance of democratic forces without the reality of democracy. So, because the last thing Hillary and the deep state would ever want is self-determination for anybody. But what we're now learning is that the last thing that same deep state that carried out regime change, color revolutions in other parts of the world, now we're learning that they don't hesitate to do it inside the United States as well. And that's what we're involved in right now. That's what we're living. The reality that we're living is probably something, certainly something that I realized in that when Rahm Emanuel said I wasn't a team player, and then I realized what that team really represented and the ability of the team to actually pick and choose who's going to be on their team. But that's a kind of silent coup. JFK was a hard coup. But ever since then, we've been having these silent coups. And the introduction of electronic voting machines just made it easier for the coups to take place. And the kind of election fraud that we saw in the 2020 election, in Atlanta, in Fulton County, what they have discovered as a result of the independent forensic audit is that over 70% of the ballots were quote unquote adjudicated. And the adjudication meant that the election worker could then subvert the will of the voter and actually vote that ballot. And that was done 70% of the time. We have no way of knowing who actually won. We know who lost. We actually have no way of knowing. We've known that since my time when I was on the ballot with those electronic voting machines, and they, stop in the middle of the night, and then all of a sudden I'm behind and I'm losing. So, and then the state of Georgia said, well, in court, they swore and they said, well, you just have to trust us that the person we announce as the winner is the actual winner. So we haven't had election integrity in a long time, if we ever had it. But now, what are we prepared to do about it? And so I think that is the issue. Are we prepared to accept this fate? Or are we prepared to do whatever it takes in order to create our own fate? And I just, if we must die, let it not be like dogs, hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot. It's so, for me, it's County Cullen, or it might even, give me liberty or give me death, But these things that we say we believe in, we actually have to act as if we believe in them.
Well, it's funny how the media will take an issue, that's a real issue, and then twist it around, and the next thing you know, it's like on its side or on its head. And I think about the election, the Trump election, and all the hubbub about, was it stolen, was it not stolen? And I'm like, every election's been stolen. What are you guys talking
That's
about?
right.
And then I hear, and that's not defending Trump or anything. I mean, my point is the whole thing is a sham.
That's right.
You don't take this position just because your candidate lost or won. And it's interesting to see, people that were progressive, now defending Diebold, like,
I know.
I'm
That's
like,
right.
what the hell's going on here? Diebold, do you know what the history of Diebold is?
That's right. That's right. They are defending the guilty. And so, you look at, if you have confidence that you carried out an election with integrity, then you should have no problem having an audit performed. And Maricopa County in Arizona has demonstrated, the Democrats have demonstrated that they did what they did in Georgia. And now it's coming clear what they did in Georgia, because we have an independent group of people who are investigating it under the guidance of a court, of an officer of the court. So now we're seeing it, and we saw it anyway. We saw it anyway, but now it's being verified that what we thought we saw, we actually did see. Yeah. And it was repeated in other parts of the country as well. I remember back in, what election was that, 2016, when was it 16? Yeah, when the Russia narrative first took hold. And the Green Party, which I disagreed with at the time because they were trying to say, well, Russia interfered in our election. But the Green Party leader, Jill Stein, decided to do a audit of Detroit, of Michigan. And Hillary actually lost votes. Why? Because she used the Black community to stuff ballots in Detroit, and she lost votes because when they went back and actually counted the votes, she didn't have as many as they said that she did. And that happened all over the country, and now they've perfected it. So we cannot have confidence in any election. What does that mean? Do we participate? We're basically a one-party state. And that's because the Democrats and Republicans are of one party. They're of the deep state. And so this one-party state that we have needs to be, we the people need to make it ungovernable. And so that's why I've been looking at the yellow mess over in France. I went over there to participate with them in one of their protests. They are advocating direct democracy, and I advocate direct democracy. It's time is out for indirect democracy. No one can represent me better than I can represent myself.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there are limits to democracy too. I think that there needs to be a hard boundary on, even if there is, everyone gets to vote. Like, I don't think there's certain things people shouldn't be able to vote on in terms of me. I have a lot of like libertarian, but not a capitalist. Like, I'm a very
Mm-hmm.
anti-capitalist, but I think there's limitations to even that. Like, so it's almost, there needs to be a little bit like a, I don't know. Anyways, that's a longer,
Well,
that's a
yeah,
whole.
I would just add that, we could do with a lot less government in the United States, to be honest. We don't need all of these different layers. We do need separation of powers. We need that. We need checks and balances. Yes, we need that. But we don't need all of this that we have. And we certainly don't need the taxation that we have now.
Absolutely. And I brought up the voting thing, not really to take sides. And I'm glad you said that, because my point wasn't, oh, the Democrats did this or the Republicans did that. Even engaging in that dialectic is missing the point. Like, you're captured at that point.
That's right.
You've already lost at that point. And so, one of the things I always thought about, which is like, politicians, and you can agree with me or disagree with me or agree with me with a caveat or whatever, but I don't think politicians are actually making any decisions at all. I think, for the most part, I mean, it seems like they don't write the legislation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
They
and
don't write it, and
and
they
they
don't
don't.
read it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
That's,
right.
yeah. Thank you, because that's how I felt. And I'm just like, people are arguing about this or that. I'm like, it's a straw man. This whole thing's a fraud. Like,
That's right.
other than you get some weirdo like Cynthia McKinney up in there that's like, what's going on around here?
Right.
Uh,
And then, start telling the secrets, and then all of a sudden, you're booted out. But that's exactly what we need. We need to get some people in there who can tear down the unnecessary structures that have been created.
yeah. I don't, I'm a little bit cynical about I think we're past the point of no return in terms of getting someone in there.
I
Um,
suspect that you're right.
I don't want to say that, but that's just how I
Yeah.
feel. I think that
Yeah.
I think we just need to stop. We need massive civil disobedience, and we need to start building new structures on our
I
own,
agree.
and just turning our backs on it. At this
Yes.
point, I don't think you can fight it either. It's like they've got a lot of guns, and they've got a lot of technology, and they've got a lot of money and power.
Yeah, well, we
Um,
got a few guns ourselves, and we have brains.
yeah,
So I think, if we could use that brain power uh,
and
to
love
counter
power.
their moves, I think that would be very productive.
And I would say love power. I mean, that's one thing that I
Oh,
think that
yeah,
that we have that they lack, is the power of compassion and caring for one another, which is
that's right.
actually really, really strong, I would say.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So they actually have, you started speaking the truth, and they even redistricted your
Several
area,
times.
and you still beat them, which was I
Well, it wasn't until I guess they tried everything, but I think what really got me was that what they learned is that they could run another Black person against me, and it would confuse Black people. And so that's basically what happened, is that you had Black people who were misled by the media, and they believed what the media told them. And so therefore, either in addition to the presence of the electronic voting machine, so I can never just uh, forget about that, because the electronic voting machines were there, and they were probably the primary reason that they were able to defeat me. But then they also, if if the margin is small, then the shenanigans can take place. If the margin is large, then it's a little bit more difficult for them. And well, until 2020, when even a large margin, they were able to manage it. But so I think when they tried different mechanisms, and when they finally figured out that they could run a black man or they could run a white man, and then you'd have they could run a black man or a black woman, and then you have the white Democrats and white Republicans join together. They figured the mechanism to use to get rid of me, plus the redistricting. I mean, you know, it was just like this on top of this, on top of this, on top of this. And so they were able finally to get me. In the end, though, you know, the bottom line is I understand that no member of Congress wants to end up like I ended up. But would I do it differently? No, because I told the truth. And our country just, what's the utility of having me be in Congress if I'm just like the rest of them? That's the question I asked myself. And the answer is unacceptable to me.
And even with Bernie Sanders, you know, I always felt, you know, I kind of supported him up until 2016. And by 2016, I was completely done with the guy. I'm like, screw that guy. He was, you know, caving in with Hillary was just unforgivable. And then he did it.
Yes.
He did it again.
And then he did it again.
He did it again.
That's right.
But before that, I kind of and I was like, oh, here's the one guy. But then even then I thought, well, he's like the token guy. He doesn't actually have any power. So it actually serves them to have like one person that's like raising hell that can't actually do anything. And then they say, look,
you know what?
We got a democracy here. You're being representative in this one dude that can't do anything.
But here's the thing. There is tremendous power in the position of U.S. Senator. One U.S. Senator can make tremendous change if they have the courage and the guts to stand for their convictions. And so what we're witnessing is extreme cowardice on the part of those whom we elect. Because the Senate seat, and this is something that I've thought about for a long time, and I said, okay, you know, that would have been the natural progression for me, because I would have actually used the power of the office. That's not being used today, and that's why things are looking as desperate as they are.
And there's a
Rand Powell could use all those people who lost their homes in the foreclosure in 2008, all Obama had to do was, as a senator, put one sentence in the legislation saying any entity that received public funding would be subjected to public audit. One sentence would have changed the whole trajectory of everything that happened. That one sentence was not added to the legislation. Obama could have done it. Instead, people, thousands at least of people lost their homes. So one senator can do a lot. And we have to make sure when we're voting that the people we vote for have character references from people that we know. If they don't have a character reference, I mean, you know, the electronic voting and the absentee ballot fiasco has kind of mooted all of this now. But if people who are running and offering themselves for office, if they don't have a character reference from someone whom I respect, they can't get my vote any longer. Although they will get somebody else's vote. They will get the fabricated vote.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing I wanted to point out too, that a lot of people don't realize is there's a significant difference in the power that a congressperson has versus a senator, correct? I mean, you were a congresswoman, but you ran for Senate, but didn't didn't
I
succeed,
didn't,
but
I
you want to
never
just talk
ran for
about,
Senate.
okay, I'm sorry, my bad.
I would love, I would love to be a senator and actually wield the power of a senator for on behalf of the people.
Do you want to just real
Um,
quickly say what the difference of in power is, just like
well,
very briefly?
okay, so one example is that you've got, well, you have the Congress is 535 members. 435 of them are in the House of Representatives. And in order to pass any piece of legislation, you have to get 218 votes. And in order for the legislation to be brought to the floor, you have to have either overwhelming, we talked earlier about astroturfing, so you have to have overwhelming astroturfing capability, or you have to have deep state support. Some bills are introduced and passed the same day. And that lets you know that train left the station and it's gone, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But now, say the deep state has a bill and they introduce it in the House and it passes in one day, it passes in 24 hours. Then it goes over to the Senate. Well, everything in the Senate is done by unanimous consent. So you just say, I object. 2 words. And then they have something called a hold. And you can put a hold on a bill and then the bill never be discussed until your objections are met with respect to the language that's in that bill. Or maybe the language that's in another bill. There's a filibuster that they want to get rid of. But we saw what the Southerners did with the filibuster. And so say you're anti-war and you don't want the United States bombing Somalia or Afghanistan or Syria as they're doing now. Or you don't want weapons transfers to be made to Saudi Arabia so they can bomb Yemen, as is being done now. And there's one of you or 2 of you. Well, you can make your point before the court of public opinion by using the filibuster. That's why they want to get rid of it. I support the filibuster.
Yeah. Jimmy Stewart.
That's right.
uh,
That's right.
I think Marvel has a new movie coming out about AstroTurf Man. He's a superhero that destroys democracy and brings power to the elite. That's a joke.
Yeah. AstroTurf Man is alive and well.
I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the infamous and amazing, beautiful grilling you did of Donald Rumsfeld. I remember watching that and just, so many of us felt so defeated. And then just watching you, he was, he lost, he didn't even have words, and for Donald Rumsfeld, Mr. Unknown Knowns, to kind of be speechless was actually quite a beautiful thing. Do you think that how much did that play in your ousting of
Yeah, I did that to Chertoff. I was equal opportunity. It didn't matter if you were Democrat or Republican. I did it to Colin Powell. I did it to Madeleine Albright. All of the people that we're told matter and count, that we're supposed to look up to in the world, that the world's supposed to be looking up to. I asked them the tough questions that, my colleagues would say, Cynthia, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do that, but I was bringing out the facts of US policy. If I didn't do it, nobody would do it. I was the only one who voted against the Pentagon budget year after year after year after year. Why? Democrats and Republicans both passed that bill just like that with all
Bernie
that
Sanders.
death in it.
Bernie Sanders
Voted, that's right. They passed it just like that. And then they told me, Cynthia, you're not supposed to do that. Anyway, so like I said, this idea of Democrats and Republicans being something different, I had one very well known member of the House of Representatives tell me, Cynthia, you just have to accept that if the leadership tells us to do something, we're going to do it. So the people think that they've elected leaders. They have not. They've elected cowards.
Yeah. Hear, hear. And one of the things I've loved about you over the years is you've always, even if it's an unpopular, what's the quote by Martin Luther King? So, sometimes you have to do things because they're not politically expedient. I don't have the quote in front of me, but it's maybe I'll find it and put it up on the screen when I make this. But you sometimes you do things even though they're not politically expedient, they're not popular, but you do them because they're right. And it seems like you've done that over and over again, from bringing up the sex trafficking that DynCorp was doing, the missing money with the Pentagon, and 9/11. You've been outspoken about trying to get to the truth of 9/11. Clearly, we have not been told the truth about 9/11, and you were a part of the Citizens Watch. You signed a statement calling for an investigation. Um, you know, Israel Palestine. I know you've been outspoken on what's going on to the Palestinians. You were on a couple of ships that were trying to bring humanitarian aid into Gaza. I remember that. And you weren't on the ship that was attacked, right? But it was Ram? But what was the one where people were killed? That was a different ship than you were on, right?
That was the Mavi Marmara. And the
That's
only
right.
thing that saved me was that because the Israelis boarded that ship, they repelled on the ship and they had kill lists. And I kept wondering, why is that the Israeli media keeps saying I'm going to be on the ship? Several things. The fact that I was scheduled to be on that was mentioned in the Israeli. Well, after everything happened the way it did, I was told that they had kill lists. They knew who they were looking for. And so I can't say that I was on the list because I don't know that, but I do know that some very strange things happened with the Israeli media, always pointing to me. But what happened was my father was sick. And Joe Meadors was a USS Liberty survivor. And I thought it most appropriate that my seat go to someone who had already survived a horrific Israeli attack, not knowing, of course, that the same thing was going to happen again. And Joe Meadors was on that boat, the Mavi Marmara, and he had to live through a second deadly Israeli attack.
Yeah, the thing that astounds me, and I know that you had, when you had your, you don't do your show anymore, but you had a show, right, for a minute, and you had my friend Gilad Atzmon on your show, and one of the things that it really troubles me and breaks my heart, because I'm a humanitarian. I don't really give a shit about identity politics. We can have a debate about this or that religion, about gender, or whatever it is, nationality, but at the end of the day, it's just like people. It's like
Yes.
we're all brothers and sisters. We're all part of the same family. We're all part of the same human family. We need to start working from that space. And I know Gilad has challenged a lot of the identity politics, and a lot of people that identify as Jewish, whether it's through their ancestry or through their religion or through their adherence to the Holocaust religion and the state of Israel, and like this new thing that's kind of grown up in the past 150 years. And I don't really know what to do about that, but it's like, it seems to me like they are being used as cannon fodder to defend something that's really indefensible, in terms of this parasitic state. And I know you talk a lot about the Israeli lobby, which is another, taboo subject that you're just not supposed to go there. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Well, here's the quote. I've been looking for the quote. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. So now, in terms of the whole, I have been outspoken on the Palestine issue, the Israeli lobby, the control that the Israeli lobby has on US domestic as well as foreign policy. And I absolutely love Gilad Atzmon. What a wonderful man. And you're right that he challenges people to think about themselves and the boxes that we readily and gladly put ourselves into. So in terms of the identity politics, I'm taking myself out of those boxes and putting myself into the box of humanity.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll do this again. And thank you so
Okay.
much for your time, and keep fighting the fight. And I appreciate you.
Okay, thank you so much. And I appreciate you, and, eat a lot of peaches from Georgia.
Yeah, I need some Georgia peaches in my life. I've actually never been to Georgia. That's one of the states I've never made it to. So I'll have to swing down there if I'm able to travel ever again.
Oh, yes, we must do this, because now, the Biden administration, I can't even believe I'm saying that, but the Biden administration is frightening in what they're proposing. No interstate travel. I mean, they just have gone too far. So yes, I will send you those dates and we'll get back together.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, thank
Okay,
you.
thanks, Jason.
All right. Have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Georgia, Ms. McKinney.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I watched President Bush deliver a moving speech at the United Nations in September 2003, in which he mentioned the crisis of the sex trade. The president called for the punishment of those involved in this horrible business. But at the very moment of that speech, DynCorp was exposed for having been involved in the buying and selling of young women and children. While all of this was going on, DynCorp kept the Pentagon contract to administer the smallpox and anthrax vaccines, and is now working on a plague vaccine through the Joint Vaccine Acquisition Program. Mr. Secretary, is it policy of the U.S. government to reward companies that traffic in women and little girls? That's my first question. My second question, Mr. Secretary, according to the Comptroller General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon, to which Mr. Cooper alluded. Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the #1 reason why the government can't balance its checkbook. The Pentagon has claimed year after year that the reason it can't account for the money is because its computers don't communicate with each other. My second question, Mr. Secretary, is who has the contracts today to make those systems communicate with each other? How long have they had those contracts? And how much have the taxpayers paid for them? Finally, Mr. Secretary, after the last hearing, I thought that my office was promised a written response to my question regarding the 4 war games on September 11th. I have not yet received that response, but would like for you to respond to the questions that I've put to you today, and then I do expect the written response to my previous question, hopefully by the end of the week.
Thank you, Representative. First, the answer to your first question is no, absolutely not. The policy of the United States government is clear, unambiguous, and opposed to the activities that you described. The second question.
Well, how do you explain the fact that DynCorp and its successor companies have received and continue to receive government contracts?
I would have to go and find the facts, but there are laws and rules and regulations with respect to government contracts, and there are times that corporations do things they should not do, in which case they tend to be suspended for some period. There are times then that under the laws and the rules and regulations that passed by the Congress and implemented by the executive branch, that corporations can get off of out of the penalty box, if you will, and be permitted to engage in contracts with the government. They're not generally not barred in perpetuity.
This company was never in the penalty box. If you could proceed to my second question, please.
The second question, I've forgotten what the second question was.
I think Ms. Jonas knows it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. I appreciate the question. I appreciate your interest in our department's financial condition, and we are working very hard on that program. I've just come back recently.
I understand that you're working hard on it, but my question was, who has the contract? How long have they had that contract? And how much money have we spent on it?
In general, we spend about $20 billion in the Department on Information Technology Systems. The accounting systems are part of that. I can get you the exact number for the record of what we spend on our current, what we call legacy systems, and those that we're moving toward.
And who has the contracts?
That would be a multitude of individuals.
Could you name some, please?
Well, I think off the top of my head, well, I would rather not. I'd rather provide that for the record.
That's not privileged information, is it?
I'm sure it's not.
Well, please. Yeah. And we still have time, so please.
I would be glad to provide for the record. I don't want to talk from the top of my head and be incorrect.
On your first question, I'm advised by Dr. Chu that it was not the corporation that was engaged in the activities you characterized, but I'm told it was an employee of the corporation, and it was some years ago in the Balkans that took place.
It's my understanding that it continues to take place, and
is that right?
Yes.
Well, if you can give me information to that effect,
I'm sure you are interested in all of the information that I have, and I'll be more than happy to provide it to you.
Good, thank you.
But I would also like to get information from you.
Okay.
For example, the information that I just requested about who has those contracts.
Certainly.
Let me assure the gentlelady that we'll make sure that this exchange of information takes place, and Mr. Secretary, if you can get back with us on the DynCorp story, we'll get that to the gentlelady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll get back on both of the first two questions, but the Congresswoman has raised the other question twice now, and I'd like to have General Myers respond because you mentioned it in the last hearing, and I think it would be helpful to get the answer, even though we're on red, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
General Myers, go right ahead.
But I would like to have the answer in writing as well, as I thought my office was promised.
Okay, I don't know about the promise, Congresswoman, but could you repeat the question to make sure I'm answering the right question? This is 9/11 question.
The question was, we had 4 war games going on September 11th, and the question that I tried to pose before the Secretary had to go to lunch was whether or not the activities of the 4 war games going on September 11th actually impaired our ability to respond to the attacks.
The answer to the question is no, did not impair our response. In fact, General Eberhard, who was then the commander of North American Aerospace Defense Command, as he testified in front of the 9/11 Commission, I believe he told them that it enhanced our ability to respond, given that NORAD didn't have the overall responsibility for responding to the attacks today. That was an FAA responsibility. But they were 2 CPXs. There was 1 Department of Justice exercise that didn't have anything to do with the other 3. And there was an actual operation ongoing because there was some Russian bomber activity up near Alaska. So
let me ask you this then. Who was in charge of managing those war games?
And General, why don't you give the best answer you can here in a short period of time, and we'll. The gentlelady wants to get a written answer anyway, and then we can move on
the important thing to realize is North American Aerospace Defense Command was responsible These are command post exercises. What that means is all the battle positions that are normally not filled are indeed filled. So it was an easy transition from an exercise into a real-world situation. It actually enhanced the response. Otherwise, it would take somewhere between 30 minutes and a couple of hours to fill those positions, those battle spaces, with the right staff officers.
Mr. Chairman, begging your indulgence, was September 11th declared a National Security Special Event Day?
I have to look back. I do not know. You mean after the fact or before the?
No, because of the activities going on that had been scheduled at the United Nations that day.
I'd have to go back and check. Don't know.
Thank you.
Okay. I thank the gentlelady.